There was DSDM that even then nobody remembered about it, and people didn't know what it was. But some of these things survived. Kind of Scrum still survived. XP is somewhere in the background. People do parts of XP without even kind of thinking about it. Other things, as I said, like Crystal, have kind of disappeared. But somewhere around 2001, 2002, Agile Alliance got started, and the big Agile conference got started by the Agile Alliance. And kind of somewhere around there, people, 3 or 4 years later, people stopped talking about XP and Scrum, they started talking about Agile. And Agile was primarily a brand. That's what Agile is. A brand is a mark of quality. It's a mark that you can identify with, it's a mark that you can recognize, and that's why having Agile on your resume meant sense 15 years ago. But then kind of companies also figured out that if they hired Agile product owners instead of hired business analysts, they generally got better people. If they hired somebody with Agile experiences, generally those were people who were more interested in making the work happen. And they started hiring for kind of Agile. But then they realized kind of we can just hire for Agile and not really do anything else. So let's hire Agile product owners and give them a job of a traditional business analyst. And that really didn't work that well. And the problem is with the brand. That there's because Agile was this kind of abstract brand, the big danger with the brand is diluting it by using it for shit it does not relate to, like something like this. So Star Wars meant something at some point. Now, in 2025, I don't know, Yoda and Chewbacca can make a sex tape, still nobody's going to be interested in watching it anymore. And it's lost all meaning. And the problem with Agile as a brand is it didn't really have a big commercial entity behind it to protect it. When you have a brand like Google or Coca-Cola or something like that, you try to use Coca-Cola on a toothpaste like this, you get shut down immediately. If you're Disney, you're a moron, and then you license your kind of brands to milk it this way. But Agile didn't really have that, and then it was just applied to everything and anything. So this is what I think the equivalent of the toothpaste is. It's kind of learn Agile with Jira. What that means? How do you learn a brand with a tool? Like, learn Coca-Cola with bottles. Like, how? But you know what? Now you start using this thing, then people figured out you can just apply it to anything to make it funky. And when you have something like that, it really becomes dangerous. I remember in 2009, there was a big thing where some guy started a company called the World Agile Qualification Board, and started issuing online certificates. So you can be a certified World Agile Qualification Board something. And the community was like up in arms. Everybody was kind of writing against them. Elizabeth Hendrickson wrote a really kind of lengthy post about it. Jim Shaw wrote something against it. I wrote something against it. We all called on the Agile Alliance to shut them down. Because Agile Alliance was the thing. And the response from the Agile Alliance was, well. And at this point, the brand just loses value. And you can apply it to anything and everything, and usually kind of what ends up happening is things that have nothing to do with Agile, put Agile in the name just so that people think that this thing is associated with it, and kind of pointless, completely pointless. There's this old joke where any discipline that has science in the name is not actually a science. You have political science or economic science, and you don't have mathematics science, physics science. It's just physics. So, Agile was never a process. Any process that has Agile in the name is probably not Agile. And from that perspective, Agile from a brand became basically an HR scam. And that's the big problem. People were using it to get hired. People were using it to hire other people easily. And it was just going around and you can't really do this for a long time. And I think that's part of this kind of brand identity crisis that Agile is experiencing at the moment, because it means nothing anymore. And even worse, kind of the big problem with this thing being an HR scam is that it happened at the same time, coincidentally, with one of the biggest pushes for more software ever in history. So the internet exploded on the scene around the same time as Agile did, and they influenced each other. Kind of companies were trying to go through this gold rush of just more. Everybody was going online. People didn't care about whether what they were building makes sense or not. It was just now, faster, yesterday. And in a gold rush, we ended up, as a community, producing shovels that we can sell. Companies ended up producing Agile this or Agile that. We started printing certificates of attendance after 2 days of sitting in a workshop to then become something that is potentially helpful. And clients didn't care because they were just busy buying shovels. Because in a gold rush, you can wait for the perfect tool to arrive, but by the time it does, somebody else dug up all the gold and moved somewhere downstream. You're still in the wrong place. So, and this is where kind of part of the problem is. I spoke to this friend of my wife a year and a half ago, and she's a Scrum coach. She finished psychology and realized that probably she's not a good psychologist, so she wasn't making enough money in psychology. IT made a lot more money. And then she decided, well, I can make some more money in IT. It's kind of easier and cheaper than, and more like brings more money than kind of fixing psychological problems. And got a certificate, and then ended up a couple of years later working for a few different companies. And she said, like, developers never want to talk to her, and they don't respect her. Like, well, yeah, I mean, you've never developed anything useful in your life. You've kind of failed as being a psychologist, and you're expecting people to respect you, like, on the basis of what? Like, okay, So, of course, not all Scrum coaches like that. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that we produce lots of shovels that are useless. And that's gone. And now, as a result, we have this kind of huge branding crisis where Agile doesn't mean anything. And people are trying to keep communities in place like this, but nobody knows what to call it anymore. There's a series of conferences in England called Agile in the City. They're now just called Ripples. What does Ripples mean? Nobody knows. But it's not Agile anymore, so, developers are coming again. As developers no longer come to Agile conferences. And there's a kind of other places try to kind of figure out something else. Some conferences are keeping A in the name, just kind of reducing it to an acronym. It now means AI, because AI is the new gold rush. And I think the best thing I've found so far is like Agile Day Chicago. They wanted to keep the conference, but they didn't know what to call it anymore, so kind of they called it this, which is kind of, at the same time, the most brilliant conference name. So, I would love to see this conference again next year. I have strong doubts about Agile being in the name anymore here, and we'll see. But so then the question is, what is worth saving here, and how do we move beyond the brand? And I have 5 assumptions that kind of have happened or are happening. And I want to talk about that, and I'll try to defend them. So the first assumption that I have is that whatever was important about building software that was part of Agile is done. It's been done a very long time ago. That's what Dave Farley mentioned this morning. If you want to know how to build software effectively, that knowledge exists. It's online, it's in books, people can ignore it, that's fine, but that knowledge exists. Like the last really software-related piece of the puzzle that at least in my opinion was innovative was somewhere in 2010, 2011 when they wrote continuous delivery. That was innovative. There was continuous integration before that. It wasn't really kind of focused on delivery too much. After that, I don't remember anything software-specific. That was a big improvement. So the other thing that kind of I think is kind of happening or already happened is there's 2 strands of Agile community. There's kind of the software Agile community, that's test-driven development, kind of the XP part that people have forgotten, and that's now kind of more or less taken for granted. And then there's this process agile, and I think kind of they're diverging. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, I don't know, but kind of we're no longer going to same conferences. Then the third thing that I think is something that is a factor we need to consider is that throughout history, technology was removing middlemen. Automated elevator buttons replaced people that are operating elevators. Hotel booking sites are replacing tourist agencies very quickly. Uber is replacing local dispatch centers. Technology is replacing middlemen. And a lot of the complexity that we've built up as an industry over the last 15, 20 years is introducing more middlemen into the process. And I think the technology is going to very quickly come and kind of replace that, because that's what technology does. As a result of that, I think the software agile part is going to keep the parts that are removing middlemen. And I think the process agile part is kind of going to keep the other kids in the divorce, and we'll see what happens. So, but kind of trying to figure out what this thing is and whether it's worth saving and how do we preserve it as a community, I think kind of we need to go back slightly to the start to figure out what it is. And the whole thing started during a gold rush with the kind of premise that the problem is that it's insane to define a 2,000-page spec several years in advance and then try to follow that. People tried to do it, it failed. People tried to do it repeatedly and it failed. People still try to do it, it fails. And I think kind of this problem existed, and as a thing that is insane, it's still today insane. Now, the big question is, why is it insane? And why was it insane back then? And are the solutions we're applying still applicable? And from an engineering perspective, one of the things that people often do when they're faced with a complex problem is divide it into two parts. So we can divide this thing into two parts. Is this insane because it's several years in advance? Or is this insane because it's a 2,000-page spec? So if I have a 2,000-page spec and I can execute it this week, is that still bad? If I have a one-page spec and I need to wait 2 years to execute it, is that still insane? Like which part of this is insane? And this is interesting because through involvement in the behavior-driven development community and kind of spec by example and things like that, I have probably more than once incrementally and iteratively created things where if you actually print them on paper, they would be more than 2,000 pages long. They're very detailed specs, but we built them throughout months or years working iteratively towards that. At the same time, I don't think kind of having a single page thing that I need to wait 2 years to kind of see if it comes true or not makes sense in this industry. Things are moving too quickly. Things were moving too quickly when internet came, but then we also had mobile devices coming, we also had the cloud, now we have all kind of this AI crap coming. Things are speeding up. So I think it's the time that's kind of the problem. And by the way, with this kind of whole AI thing and code generators and things like that coming, producing software to satisfy something is rarely going to be the bottleneck. You can churn out things very quickly. The big problem is, I think, do we have the right specs for that? If not, then things like this happen that are kind of really, really problematic. And I think we can now start thinking about, well, how do we prevent ourselves from falling into traps where we miss problematic things like this? And 2 days ago, Microsoft released a new tool that's supposed to deal with this. I've not had time to play with it yet. I'm very, very eager to look at that when I have a bit of time. And it's called Spec Kit. You can look at it on GitHub. It's an effort to allow organizations to focus on product scenarios rather than writing undifferentiated code with the help of spec-driven development. Amazon has a tool that is in private beta called Kiro. There is an IDE for helping you do your best work by bringing structure to AI coding by using spec-driven development. the fuck is spec-driven development? I mean, so I clicked on the link, what is spec-driven development? And it says spec-driven development is blah, blah, blah. Specifications become executable. We've been talking about this for 20 years. And yes, for 20 years, the bottleneck was probably tooling. Yes, you need to kind of think about given, when, then. You need to think about how you're going to automate it. You need to kind of restructure it. You need to consolidate it. You need to do this. And it's like the whole thing, we've been around patterns to do this. But maybe not. Maybe this thing can just read text and understand it. I don't know. At the end, it's not important. The first version of these tools probably doesn't work the way it should. But technology is rising to replace middlemen there. It's kind of all the facilitation stuff I've learned about getting people to think about doing given, when, thens. Maybe it's not important anymore. Maybe the tooling is going to replace it in a few years. So then the question is, if we go back to this, is it insane? Is what we call agile still a valid solution to this problem? Or are there better solutions now? Are there different solutions? And then, what is then? I mean, it has to be more than a brand. You cannot say a brand is a solution to this. It's not. And then, kind of, Agile Alliance has this kind of semi-definition of what's inside Agile that's not a brand, and they call this thing the Agile Subway Map. And on the Agile Subway Map, there are things that are definitely still part of the solution, like iterative development. Yes, please. We know that that's a good idea. They have version control. Absolutely. I for a very, very long time, probably 15, 16 years, I've not seen anybody working on software without version control. It's just there as a background. You don't need to go and teach people why it's a good idea. Kids learn it at universities these days. There's a revolution, kind of teaching people, do this. I had a client about 15, 16 years ago where their version control was a guy called Charles. You would send him emails with kind of code and he would integrate it. When XP first came out, the Extreme Programming book, they talked about continuous integration, but they talked about it in a way like you should have a dedicated machine that's used for continuous integration. And then when the code is ready for that, the pair of programmers that built their code should kind of take it to that machine and integrate it. Luckily, we have better solutions now. It's faster, it's better. So some of this stuff, I really don't know. Like there's CRC cards. I've not seen anybody use CRC cards for at least 15 years. Is anybody using CRC cards in the audience? No. There's shit here that I had to look up what it is, like Nico. Nico is a mood board where every team member puts like a smiley face how they're feeling today. And by having it on the subway map, it is, I don't know, equally important as TDD. What? How? I mean, so even this, there's parts that, I don't know, no longer applicable solutions, parts that are. And kind of the challenge here is really, even this map has this whole kind of problem where some things are really conceptual ideas, like iterative delivery. Some things are like, I don't know, a stupid board where you're supposed to talk about your feelings. And some of it is like a very, very contextual solution, like project charters or 3Cs or something like that, that might or might no longer apply. And the big problem with kind of this is that as a community, we started, one of the ideas that was introduced when kind of people talking about all these different processes, that we might not really have everything figured out. So inspect and adapt was a big thing. And when you take conceptual ideas, you put inspect and adapt, and you roll it for 25 years, you get lots of contextual solutions. There's, in this situation, this works, in this situation, that works, and then kind of people end up making things very, very complicated. 3 years ago, I was talking at this very conference about kind of how scaling Agile is wrong. And I used an example where the original Scrum guide was 10 pages long. And kind of 2 months before that conference, a book came out called Essential Scrum that was 800 pages long. So we ended up from something that fits on 10 pages, that covers everything, to an essential thing, not even covering everything that's 800 pages long. That's insane. I mean, you know, when you look at what people have done with all this stuff now, we have stuff like this that's supposed to describe Agile. I don't even know where to start with this. What is this? I mean, yeah, I kind of, so is this dead? I mean, this thing was never alive. This thing is like a hallucinogenic dream of a project manager that ate too many magic mushrooms and then started doing something. It's like, look at the colors, it's vibrant, it's wonderful. So the problem with kind of this is we ended up with so many contextual solutions. There's so many things, and when there's so many things, people just stop caring about it. It's like Star Wars. Star Wars, when it started, there were 3 movies. It was easy to get excited about that. And then they did the 3 rubbish ones, but we can still forgive them for that because we can ignore they didn't exist. But now we have this, like, how do I get excited about this? And plus, you know, they started with this idea of good and bad and Jedis and Sith and things like that. There's this crap here where the Sith are a persecuted religious minority just looking for their place in the world. No, man, Sith are bad. That's the whole purpose of it. So how do we get to something that's totally kind of the opposite of this? I mean, how did we in 20 years get from this to this? That's like, I have no idea. So that really bothers me. That really, really bothers me. You know, somewhere on this map, there's like waterfall hiding and saying we're a religious persecuted minority. We should be allowed to survive. So that's kind of the mess we're in now. And I think there's a couple of things that led to this. One is that like the easy wins, they've been already done 20 years ago. People figured out how to do TDD, people figured out how to do iterations, people figured out how to do retrospectives and things like that. Those were kind of the big changes that really made a big difference. And that part of the revolution is over. I don't know like a single team today that doesn't use version control or have some form of automated tests. I mean, maybe they're not following TDD, but they have some form of automated test. They're using continuous integration most likely because it's so available. They're using version control. Like most teams today do have some kind of iteration. It might not be 2 weeks, it might be a month. I don't know anybody who's doing like 2-year cycles anymore. Maybe these people still exist. They're hiding somewhere on that map, and it's fine. But it's not creating like the big difference. And I think kind of from that perspective, software delivery is really not the number one bottleneck for most organizations today. Introducing more ways of doing retrospectives is not gonna really change anything too much. There's probably 50 different ways you can improve user stories. I know for a fact I wrote the fucking book, but after you do the 5 most important ones, does adding number 6 to your process really help? No. And kind of what people are struggling today is no longer shipping software. We can do that. But because we can ship so much software, people are struggling with technical debt. They're struggling with shipping the wrong things. They're struggling with engineering. They're struggling with all sorts of other things. And you can see that kind of reflected in the program of the conferences. We had a talk on engineering today. We had a talk on UX research. Last year, we had kind of similar talks. We had like curiosity. I was talking about lizards for some reason. Aino was talking about Lord of the Rings. And Bjarte talked about beyond budgeting, how you kind of have to change the organization so that budgeting practices are different, so you don't do kind of big planning once a year on your C-level board meetings and things like that. You do that agile. Who was here last year for these talks? Okay, keep your hand up if you've implemented beyond budgeting in your organization. So one person maybe. So we're getting to the point where a lot of the talks that happen at the conference are just not applicable anymore to people that come to the conference. We're getting to the point where none of this is actually relevant to software developers. And the software developers are now going to other conferences. And that's kind of the thing. And the big problem, again, with something like this is it's not new. It's something that's happened over and over again in history. There was a thing in 1970s in Japan where they figured, listen to the idea that the people that know best how to improve the work are the people actually doing the work. So they got workers in factories to meet up regularly, once a week, and to discuss how to improve the work. Revolution. And it actually did help Japanese factories, and it did something, and then it got copied over to American factories, and it was called quality circles. And it survived for about 10 years before being completely shut down and forgotten in history because it created no big impact. And I found a 1985 article in Harvard Business Review that talks about quality circles being a fad, like people are talking about Agile being a fad now. And one of the things that they talk about is kind of very often people would meet there and they would conclude things that are way above their pay grade to change, way above their area of influence. So yes, you and I can meet and decide that implementing beyond budgeting in the company would be the next big thing to do, but will that happen or not? That's a completely different question. And the problem with something like this is that when you have a group of people that are trying to improve the process and you give them the job of improving the process, but you don't give them the authority to make big impacts, what they're going to do is just going to kind of make their part of the work more elaborate because that's what they can impact. And I think that's a lot what's been happening with the industry over the last 10 years at least. We've made all the other parts a lot more elaborate, and they don't need to be that. They don't need to be that complicated. It's like, in martial arts, people actually used to fight. So they had all these techniques, but now you're not allowed to hurt anybody anymore, so we have all these katas that are like a very elaborate dance. And it's getting more and more elaborate, and you practice the steps, and you get perfect steps. But, there's this kind of kata type of karate where people just can't fight. They can dance. That is the problem. We've invented this very, very elaborate dance. And we started with this kind of interesting idea where people were doing stuff individually. They were not communicating well. You can try introducing lots and lots of techniques there that are like TDD and version control. But if people are not talking effectively to each other, they have no big effect. So somewhere 2005, we figured, well, we need soft skills. We need communication skills. We need to get people to talk to each other. We need stickies. We need whiteboards. We need all of this stuff. And then we started kind of improving on that part of the process a lot and doing it. And it became really interesting because we invented a million new ways of collaborating. Now, as a result of that, now you have kind of these psychologists that are going around and trying to instill those things in teams where maybe they work, maybe they don't. We've lost the whole inspect and adapt part. So, kind of going back to what I mentioned at the start and people raising their hands, there's really two different parts of this. We divide the problem. There's kind of developing software and helping other people do it. So, let's see who we have in the audience today. Like, raise your hand if in the last 3 months you've committed a line of code to version control. Okay, half of the room. So, if you identify more with kind of helping others do it, half, good. So this is an amazing community. I would really love to keep this conference alive. Where most other conferences that I've been to recently that have Agile in the name, well, it's managers, it's Scrum Masters, it's kind of organizational psychologists and things like that. And we're doing kind of these more and more elaborate things. And the question is, how far do we go? Where how far something from coding is okay to be included in a program of a conference like this. It's a bizarre conference last year where they had a practical workshop on meditation. Because meditation helps you think more clearly. And when you think more clearly, you do better code, fine, and things like that. So by virtue of that helping code, that was okay to be in a conference. Like don't know, for me personally, like I don't like meditating. I drink too much coffee and I can't sit still. But I get all my best ideas in the shower. So, I mean, if I propose like a showering talk for the next conference, is that practical workshop, not practical workshop, maybe some pictures, who knows? I mean, you know, where do we go to stay relevant? And I think because we made this so elaborate, what happened is Agile kind of lost all its meaning. And at the start of the year, kind of the Project Management Alliance, the Project Management Institute bought Agile Alliance. It's insane. The whole thing started as an idea like you don't need project managers. And at the end, the brand became part of project management because it became so elaborate. So I think the reason why we got there, one of the reasons at least, is something that I've read in the history of Western philosophy. This is kind of a really, really thick book. I like reading it. I've been reading it for about 5 or 6 years now, a couple of pages at a time, because it's really dense and it's really thick. And Bertrand Russell talks about liberalism and how liberalism emerged as kind of philosophical practice somewhere in England after the Civil War, because Cromwell came and forbid music, forbid fun, forbid everything, and you know, got people to work. And then after Cromwell died, they kind of allowed people to play music again, and they said the society on its own should never ever be able to do something like this again. The state shouldn't meddle in people's private affairs. Like, that's a limit of that. And then out of that, kind of two branches of philosophy developed. One he calls hard-headed, one he calls soft-headed. The hard-headed one was more kind of systematic engineering and things like that. It evolved from Locke to Bentham. Bentham then influenced Karl Marx. Karl Marx influenced Stalin, who created exactly the opposite of what liberalism should be in the Soviet Union. The soft one is even funnier. The soft one influenced a couple of poets in England, notably Byron, who influenced kind of Nietzsche, who was a philosopher, and then Nietzsche influenced Hitler, and the soft branch of liberalism ended up as a Nazi state, like exactly the opposite of what it's supposed to be. So Russell concluded that basically if you follow this, lots of times in the history we have doctrines that through completely logical steps, but over a long period of time, develop in exactly the opposite of what it was supposed to be. We started from we don't need project managers into the most elaborate project management strategy that exists. Where the PMI thought, oh, we can make money from this, you know, give me that. Russell talks about how kind of these things usually happen because some things develop in what he calls advanced scenarios, where basically people take whatever they're doing now and they say, this is the practice, let's codify that practice into some kind of theory that we can teach other people about. And then that theory gets translated to kind of some other place, and the theory then inspires practice in other places. And he says that basically when you take these transplanted ideas somewhere else, the environment is different, so they can't survive. You take like ideas of liberalism from a developed civil society, you put it into rural Russia, no, totally different thing emerges. And I think that's what happened here. We had practice, and we put it into theory, and we have a transplanted practice. And for most of the time, the practice was small teams. Like the original processes worked on, 5, 10, 20, 30 people, that's fine. Then we codify it into theory, and then somebody says, oh, I have this multinational corporation that has 50,000 developers, let's do sprints. And of course it doesn't work, or at least it doesn't work that well. And by doing this more and more and more, we have this kind of branch of the software agile thing that completely disconnected from the process agile thing, because we started putting more and more processes. That's done. That's gone. So now the question is, what can we do about this? Should we do anything about this? And what happens in the next 5, 10 years? And I watched this wonderful video. It has nothing to do with Agile or whatever. It's just kind of philosophically interesting, between Werner Vogels and Jeff Bezos 3 years ago at the big reInvent conference that Amazon does. And Bezos was talking about, you can kind of watch it here, I'll give you the links. Bezos was talking about how he often gets asked by people like, oh, what's going to change in the next 10 years? How do we prepare for it? He says, that's an interesting question, but it's not the right question to ask. His answer was that you should ask the question, what's going to stay the same in the next 10 years? Because you can kind of build a strategy around that. You can't build a strategy around things that are changing, but you can figure out what's kind of going to be the same. So what's going to be the same, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? One thing I think is that technology generally is going to keep removing middlemen. Because that's what's going on all the time. And the other thing that's not going to change is we as a community will try to find better ways of kind of working. So one of the things that is going to happen is when technology starts removing middlemen is we have fewer people, and fewer people require a smaller process. So if a single developer can now support the database and the front end and the back end because they have these tools that can kind of generate stuff from specs or something else, we're going to need fewer people. Have fewer people, we need fewer facilitators. If we need fewer facilitators, we need fewer managers. If we need fewer, and it's just generally leading to a smaller process. And I think part of the software agile is going to collapse to what XP was, because fewer people, not that much coordination required. The other thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a complete butchering around kind of how much work agile coaches can get. That's already happened. And I think kind of part of that is that when you really boil this down, and I'm not really kind of judging anybody's quality of work here, but soft skills don't make software. If you want to make software, you have to code it up. You have put 10 best agile coaches in the room. Unless one of them actually starts coding, you get no software out. Put 10 horrible developers in a room, you get some code out. Will it be better if somebody there knows about facilitation, knows about retrospectives, knows about kind of, yes, absolutely. But if you look at kind of, removing people from the process, people who don't code will be removed. And by the way, I mean, developers are also a middleman between customers and the products they want. At some point will be removed as well. But on a slightly longer schedule. So kind of one thing kind of to really think about, and this is a question for you philosophically, is what you're doing and what you want to do. Are you developing better ways of uncovering better ways of developing software, and some of it can be used for other stuff and involve other stuff? Or are we uncovering better ways of doing knowledge work in general? And some of it can be used for software. Yes, we've taken lots and lots of ideas from lean, from organizational psychology, from systems thinking. We've taken lots and lots of stuff because kind of they apply to knowledge work in general. And software was such an iterative industry that we've incubated these ideas and developed lots of ideas on our own. We can now re-export them elsewhere. And I think that's exactly why PMI bought Agile Alliance. As they realized that this thing is a lot bigger than software, they can sell it as a management technique in other industries as well. And this is a massive opportunity for people if they want to do stuff like that, because we no longer need to spin around and make this part more elaborate. We can go and help people in other industries. And I spoke to a few people at this conference that are actually doing something that is very similar to Agile coaching, but for non-software teams. So I think that's an emerging pattern that's happening. So kind of, and I think people will kind of need to figure out which is which. So kind of finally, to finish this thing off, I think kind of we need to figure out what's important. And if the community itself is important, which for me really is the big thing here, then we need to figure out how to make a more relevant brand and how to give it some kind of better purpose. Because things are diverging too much and people are no longer feeling associated with whatever Agile represents. On the other hand, if for you personally, building software is more important than process or whatever, fine. I think that part of the community is already kind of left or leaving, and people are going back to engineering. They are looking at ways of doing better automated specs and better automated tests and removing middlemen in general. And they're going to be working with smaller teams in the future. But on the other hand, if evolving the process is interesting, if you are more interested in organizational sociology, programming organizations, working with teams to help them, well, maybe it's time to actually start inviting people from other industries to this conference. Maybe we expand the pool, expand the razor, and kind of we can then re-export what we've learned and what we've applied and help other people become better at it. So that's kind of what's been in my head in terms of is Agile dead or not, and I think Agile as a brand is completely dead. But some parts of it will stay alive. The technical part of it is already kind of, I said, people just do it. It's there, people learn it on the work, they learn it through universities, that's going to stay alive. Whether kind of this process part stays alive or not, that's very difficult to say, because kind of management processes come and go every couple of years. And this is kind of really interesting. So yeah, I guess that's it from me. Think about like which of these things really applies to you, and if you do come up with some kind of better idea for a brand, I think Milena is the person to know. Thank you very much.